Hey y'all, it's Kim again. So this is a document from the Wilson Center. There's other documents in here that I plan on going through as well. But this is Kennedy-Dimona and the nuclear proliferation problem, 1961 and 1962. So this concerns the Dimona plants in Israel. Since we're talking about Iran and Israel just about every day, this is good stuff. So anyway, during their visit to Israel May 17th through May 22nd, AEC scientists Croach and Stabler visited the Weizmann Institute, the Technicon, the USAEC funded swimming pool experimental reactor at Sorek, and finally the Dimona complex, then under construction. It was in that first visit that Israel provided its cover story for the Dimona project, a narrative of plausible deniability that would be observed during all future visits. When Croach and Stabler met with State Department officials on the return, they said that they were satisfied that the reactors was of the scope and peaceful character claimed by Israeli officials. That could only be a tentative judgment because Dimona was still an unfinished project. Although Croach and Stabler found no evidence that the Israelis had nuclear weapons production in mind, they acknowledged that the reactor eventually will produce small quantities of plutonium suitable for weapons. Their official report to the AEC was far more circumspect, not mentioning the weapons potential or a capability to produce plutonium. Nevertheless, as noted earlier, they mentioned the Israeli statement about the possibility that the reactor's power could be doubled in the future, which would increase the potential to produce plutonium. More documents. Okay, on his way to Vienna summit with Nikita Khrushchev, Kennedy stopped in Manhattan to meet with Ben-Gurion. For both leaders, the Dimona question was a top priority, just as Kennedy wanted Israel to remove any doubts that other countries had about its purposes. So Ben-Gurion wanted to resolve this outstanding problem and let the project be finished quietly. Ben-Gurion stood by his earlier statements that the main purpose of the reactor was peaceful, namely internal economic development. Given Kennedy's interest in regional stability and aversion to nuclear proliferation, he wanted to be able to let Israel's Arab neighbors know about the positive results of the recent Dimona visit by American scientists. The official U.S. memorandum of conversation is published in the State Department's Foreign Relations of the United States. The file copy of at the National Archives is classified, even though the FRUS volume has been published, and an Israeli English language version is also available. As noted earlier, a draft of the official MemCon has surfaced, which has some interesting differences with the final versions. For example, Ben-Gurion's tacit acknowledgement of a nuclear weapons potential and a statement suggested freedom of action about eventual reprocessing. The Israeli minutes of the conversation manifests Ben-Gurion's ambiguities and evasiveness even more strongly. For example, his assertion that for the time being, the only purposes of the Dimona reactor are for peace. Moreover, he said, we will see what happens in the Middle East. More documents. Okay. When Kennedy said that he would like to share the findings of the Dimona visit with other governments, Ben-Gurion did not object to that or the possibility of visits by neutral scientists. The British had already asked for information on the Kennedy-Ben-Gurion meeting, and one day later, their embassy was given the gist of the Dimona visit report as well as brief description of the meeting. The State Department made plans to brief Arab governments, but Deputy Assistant Secretary Armin Meyer asked Ambassador Harman if his government would be willing to work with U.S. representative at the IAEA Board of Governors meeting to make an announcement of the visit to Dimona and also to undertake quiet discussions at the meeting about a possible neutral visit to Dimona. Harman, however, objected to an IAEA role in the Dimona matter until the rest of the world had accepted the idea of inspections, and he wanted Washington to coordinate any visit by neutral scientists. The State Department had already sent a message to Egyptian Foreign Minister Fawzi by the and or about the visit, and soon sent a circular telegram to embassies in the region, but also to Oslo. Norway was interested because of its heavy water sales to Israel. And then through some messages, the highest levels of those governments were to be informed that the U.S. scientists had found no evidence of Israeli preparations for producing nuclear weapons. More documents. Okay, the State Department's assurances notwithstanding, within U.S. intelligence circles, doubts lingered. In a national intelligence estimate on Israel, declassified in 2015 at the request of the National Security Archive, the U.S. intelligence community concluded that Israel may have decided to undertake a nuclear weapons program. At a minimum, we believe it has decided to develop its nuclear facilities in such a way as to put it into a position to develop nuclear weapons promptly should it decide to do. Probably should it decide to do so, but whatever. Okay. Moreover, if the Israeli had made such a decision by 1965 and 66, the Dimona reactor would produce enough plutonium to build 1 or 2 nuclear weapons a year. Although to do that, they would need larger processing capabilities than the pilot plant then in the works. Other obstacles were the lack of testing facilities and the problem that a test would use up scarce fissile material supplies. Another obstacle cited by State Department Atomic Energy Advisor Philip Farley in a letter to an AEC official was a lack of weapons design information. In light of that concern, Farley advised the AEC to be alert to the possibility that Israeli scientists might try to acquire nuclear weapons design information through clandestine means in the United States. Thus, discreet surveillance was necessary of Dr. Israel Dostrovsky, an eminent Israeli chemist who had recently been given a teaching fellowship at Brookhaven National Laboratory. An expert on isotopes and isotope separation, Dostrovsky was a key figure in Israel's nuclear scientific establishment, later becoming the Director General of the Atomic Energy Commission in 1966 to 70. That Dostrovsky had close ties to the Israeli defense establishment may have influenced the notion that he should be a target for surveillance. And there's more documents that I'm going to look through. I will. Tell me. Okay. The Kennedy administration had to balance its apprehensions of Dimona with other concerns, such as the broader implications of the status of Palestinian refugees. With respect to Dimona, the State Department kept in mind President Kennedy's interest in visits by neutral scientists and Ben-Gurion's approval of such. Moreover, State Department officials believed that a neutral visit could obviate any overtones of inspections, which is unacceptable to Israel, and also make it possible for Washington to avoid being the sole guarantor of Israel's nuclear intentions. On the basis of the May 1961 visit by AEC scientists, during a meeting with Ambassador Harman, Phillips Talbot brought up again the idea of neutral visits and mentioned that Farley had some suggestions to make. Harmon said that he would be happy to meet with Farley, but that Israel would prefer a visit by Scandinavian or Swiss scientists. That's interesting. Okay, and then that the that the Central Intelligence Agency has kept secret important findings about the Dimona project is evident from this heavily excised report to McGeorge Bundy, which has been under appeal since 2010. Whatever the findings were, they were enough to induce Bundy to ask his aide, Robert Comer, to prod the State Department to arrange another periodic check on this by scientists. That, however, would take time. Among other records, the CIA has also withheld in its entirety a scientific intelligence report from early 1962 on the Israeli nuclear program. It is currently under appeal with the Interagency Security Classification Appeals Panel. More documents. Okay. Worried about the possibility of a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, especially in light of Egyptian talks with West Germany about the acquisition of a reactor. The British wanted to find ways to meet Arab concerns about Dimona by bringing the site under scrutiny of the emerging IAEA safeguards inspection system. The British recognized that achieving this would be very difficult. The Israelis objected to IAEA inspection because they professed to be worried about the inclusion of Soviet bloc officials on the inspection teams. Moreover, the French, who had supplied the reactor and fuel elements, were also unlikely to accept international inspection of the irradiated fuel. Nevertheless, because the Dimona was not yet an operating reactor and the IAEA safeguards division was still being created, the British suggested preliminary ad hoc steps, such as inspection by a neutral. In terms of the Arab-Israeli dispute, a neutral observer such as Canada. They believe that because of Israel's reluctance, U.S. pressure would be required. The State Department concurred with the objective of the British proposal. We fully agree on the desirability of bringing Near East nuclear development under IAEA control. Nevertheless, believing that Israeli and French objections were not likely to yield to pressure, State Department officials also favored pursuing such steps as visits by neutral scientists. They believed, however, that Canada was not neutral enough because it was so closely associated with the IAEA, nor was Ottawa likely to get any more information than Washington could. Washington had been holding talks with the Swedes, but if they did not pan out, the U.S. could arrange a visit or a second visit by its scientists. No, you're not going in there. Sorry, my dog's trying to go in the room behind me. Okay, no documents about U.S. efforts to find a neutral visitor have surfaced so far. No. All right. Sorry, have to shut the door. Okay, no documents about U.S. efforts to find a neutral visitor have surfaced so far, but apparently the Swedes expressed only faint interest in playing a role, which led Washington to decide to undertake the responsibility once more. As it had been over a year since the first visit, U.S. diplomats believed that if the Israelis agreed to another one, it would provide an opportunity for Washington to preserve a favorable atmosphere in the region by making assurances about the reactor to Cairo and other Arab capitals as long as the assurances were warranted. On 22nd of June, Talbot renewed the question with the ambassador Harmon, but the lack of response led Talbot to bring up the matter on 14th of September. By then, two AEC scientists were scheduled to visit the U.S. financed reactor at Sorek in a matter of days, and it made sense for them to include a visit to Dimona. Harman, however, said that no decision could be made until later in the month when Ben Gurion was back from Europe from a European trip. Never making a formal reply to the U.S. request, the Israelis used the ploy of an improvised visit to evade this substance of a real visit. As noted in the introduction, decades later, an Israeli source confirmed to Abner Cohen that this was indeed a trick. While the two AEC scientists, Thomas Haycock and Ulysses Stabler, did not see the complete installation, they believed that they had enough time to determine that Dimona was a research reactor, not a production reactor, which from their point of view made the visit satisfactory. U.S. intelligence did not agree because the visit left unanswered questions, such as whether, in fact, the reactor might give Israel nuclear weapons capability. A few weeks after the visit, just as the Cuban Missile Crisis was unfolding, the State Department began to inform selected governments about its results. U.S. diplomats told Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser during a briefing on the Cuban situation that the visit confirmed Israeli statements about the reactor. The British and Canadians were also told about the recent brief visit to Dimona without explanation or explaining what had made it so short. By the end of October, the department sent a fuller statement to embassies in the Middle East, as well as London, Paris, Ottawa, and Oslo. So here's a bunch of notes or whatever. So, yeah. Oh, let's look at this. Yuval Ne'eman told Abner Cohen about his trick on the visit in 1962 and many of the conversations during the 1990s and 2000s. When Cohen published Israel and the Bomb in 1998, he cited only a condensed version of Ne'eman's tale, or Ne'eman tale. Ne'eman still considered it sensitive in the 1990s. Now, almost 10 years after his passing in 2006, Cohen is comfortable citing his tale in more detail. According to Ne'eman, in an interview conducted in March of 1994, as the host of the two AEC scientists who had arrived to inspect the Sorek reactor under the terms of the Atoms for Peace program, he arranged to take them for a tour of the Dead Sea. This was a well-planned pretext to bring them to Dimona on Israeli terms. So on their way back by late afternoon, as they were passing near the Dimona reactor, Ne'eman spontaneously suggested to arrange a quick visit to Dimona to say hello to the director, whom Inspector Stabler had known from the visit a year earlier. In May of 1961, Ne'eman told them this was a great opportunity since the government was pressing for such a visit. The purpose was, of course, to have a much more informal and abbreviated visit rather than the formal one the U.S. government wanted. In doing so, Israel would ease American pressure and convince the visitors that Dimona was a research reactor, not a production reactor. When the United States continued to press for a visit, Ne'eman told me, "You just did it." Okay, cool. So these are the authors, William Burr and Abner Cohen. So just there's some more stuff on this website as well, if you want to come in here and look at it. But anyway, Hiroshima Organization for Global Peace. So anyway, I'll get this loaded up. I may try to record a little bit more for today and then kind of be done. Anyway, I'll talk to y'all later. Have a good afternoon. Bye.